Welcome to my January 2019 reading summary. Just like last year, I'm going to show you each month how my reading was and things like that. In January I read 24 books. This graph will become more interesting in the next few months, but right now it's only January, so there you go. I read 4,997 pages in January. I thought this was pretty good. I was happy with this, so yeah. In January I read 2 picture books. I read 14 books for children. I read 3 young adult books, and I read 5 books for adults. I read quite a lot of children's books this month, because in the second half of the month I went to the library and I usually borrow children's books from the library. Then rereads this month versus new reads. Most of the books I read were new reads, 22 books. This is not usual for me. I reread 1 book, and 1 book was a combination of a reread and a new read, and that was Avonturen in het Heksenbos by Paul van Loon, which consisted of some stories that I had already read before and some that I hadn't, so that's why I've counted it as a combination of the 2. In this graph you can see the genres that I read in January and how many books I read of each. So I read 5 fantasy books, no science fiction books, 10 contemporary fiction books, no rom-com, 1 historical fiction, no literature, 1 detective and mystery, no thrillers, 1 horror book, 1 paranormal book, 2 biographies and memoirs, 2 information books, and 1 Disney book in January. I like that I had a somewhat spread of genres, although I did read a lot of contemporary fiction, which is what a lot of children's books from the library fall under, as well as that it's just like my favorite genre, so yeah. The shortest books I read this month were Pak Madame by Paul van Loon. This was 27 pages, and it was a really short book, mostly intended for children who are just learning to read. Nobody Likes a Goblin by Ben Hatke was a picture book, and that was 35 pages. Now the longest books I read this month, I didn't read any really long books this month, but the longest books that I did read were Radio Boy and the Revenge of Grandad by Christian O'Connell, 400 pages. Then Radio Boy by Christian O'Connell, 368 pages. Seconds by Brian Lee O'Malley and a couple of other people, 329 pages. And Auticommunicatie by Colette de Bruin, 320 pages. Now on to my most impressive books of the month, and those were Autism and Heels by Jennifer Cook O'Toole. This was a memoir written by a woman with autism, and I really liked this memoir, and I identify with some things in it, and yeah, overall I really liked it. Then we have Marbles by Ellen Forney. This graphic memoir really impressed me. I thought it was very well done, and I really liked it. Then we have The Donut Kingdom, Cucumber Quest Book 1 by Gigi Digi. And this was a very funny graphic novel. And yeah, I really liked this one, and I look forward to read more books in the series. And lastly, The Question of the Absentee Father, and Asperger's Mystery Book 4 by E.J. Kopperman and Jeff Cohen. This was the next installment in the series, and as usual, I really liked it. So, yeah. Then on to the books that were pretty enjoyable, and most of the books I read this month fall under this category. So these are books that I liked but didn't love. So first we have More Scrawny Than Brawny, Cave Boy Dave Book 1 by Aaron Reynolds and Phil McAndrew, and this was my reread for the month. And yeah, it was nice to read this book. I liked the illustrations. It was a good story. Then Seconds by Brian Lee O'Malley and a couple of other people. This was a really good graphic novel about a girl who wants to own her own restaurant, and it has some magical realism elements. Then Mr. Wolf's Class by Aaron Nels Steinke. And I really enjoyed this graphic novel as well. Making Friends by Kristen Goodsnook. This was also a graphic novel. And yeah, I like that one as well. Then we have the 2 books in the Mighty Jack series that are currently out. Mighty Jack and Mighty Jack and the Goblin King, both by Ben Hatke. And yeah, I enjoyed these 2 as well. I would have liked to see more on the autism of Jack's sister, but other than that, I quite like this fantasy story. Then we have Dit is Autisme by Colette de Bruin and Dr. Fabienne Naber. And I enjoyed reading this book. I enjoyed the illustrations in particular, and I enjoyed learning more about the brain. Then we have the 2 books in the Samuel series. So Laat je niet hangen Samuel and Weer helemaal Samuel by Do van Ranst. And I enjoyed reading these 2 books. Then A Silent Voice, Volume 1 by Yoshitoki Oima. And I enjoyed this introduction to the series. I had a little bit of trouble getting into it, but I look forward to read the next volumes. Then we have Radio Boy, Book 1 Radio Boy by Christian O'Connell. This was a nice and funny read about a boy who wants to start his own radio show. Donald Duck Pocket 217, Terug in de Tijd by Disney. This was a nice nostalgic read. Not as good as some of the other ones I've read, but it was still nice. And lastly, Dierenfabels by Max Veldhuis, which was like a kind of picture book that involved some animals. Then we get to the books that were somewhat enjoyable, and the first one is Auticommunicatie by Colette de Bruin. I quite liked most of this book, but I didn't like the term black and white thinking. And while this is not saying that the author, she didn't invent this term or anything, but she used it, and she used it several times, quite a few times throughout the book, and it just bothered me. So, yeah. Then we have Bake Sale by Sarah Varon. This was an okay book. I was expecting a little bit more of it. I wish it had gone on beyond the ending. The illustrations were cute. Then we have Nobody Likes a Goblin by Ben Hatke. This was a nice picture book, but yeah, I guess I've read better picture books or something like that. But it was, yeah. And then Little Robot by Ben Hatke. This book had very little text, and I didn't realize when I bought it that it was going to be for such a young audience. So I guess I shouldn't fault the book that, but as an adult, I like the illustrations, but I wish there was more story, I guess. And now we get to disappointments of the month. And the first one is Radio Boy and the Revenge of Grandad by Christian O'Connell. To be honest, I think it had more to do with my mental state and how I was feeling, rather than that the book is actually bad or anything. But I just wasn't in the right headspace for this whimsical story, and so yeah. Then we have Pak Me Dan by Paul van Loon. This was pretty simplistic for me. Good, I guess, if your child is just learning to read, but it was too simplistic for me in comparison to other books by this author. And then we have Avonturen in het Heksenbos by Paul van Loon. I was less keen on this book because I was hoping it would all be new adventures, and I have actually read some of these before, and so that was, well, I didn't enjoy them as much upon reread, to be honest. I like the new stories, but upon reread, especially when I've read when the ones I've read before was last year or the year before, I didn't find them as fun upon a reread because you already know what's going to happen. And so, yeah. That concludes my January 2019 reading summary. There were not as many graphs in this one as usually because it's only January so far. So I didn't put all of the graphs in there that were not as relevant. Normally I have, for example, some pie charts in there and such, comparing the months. But there is no point doing that when there's only 1 month. So I hope the reading summary for February will be a little bit more interesting to look at, but I hope you enjoyed this anyway. Thank you very much for watching and listening, and I hope to see you in my next video. Bye!